Episode 1. The boy with an impossible dream. The Ottoman palace was heavy with expectation as Sultan Mehmed II, only 21 years old, ascended the throne. But he wasn't here just to wear a crown or sit on a throne of gold. Unlike his predecessors, Mehmed's eyes weren't set on the pleasures of the court or the traditions of his people. He was staring at something far beyond, something that seemed impossible to others. The Byzantine Empire, with its legendary city of Constantinople, had stood for over 1,000 years, laughing in the face of any who dared to conquer it. Its walls were like the hands of a giant, reaching skyward, impossible to breach. Its gates had resisted crusaders, Arab caliphates, and even the greatest armies of the medieval world. To take it was to take the heart of the known world. But Mehmed's vision was different. He looked not at the walls or the armies, but at the potential to rewrite history. Constantinople, he knew, was the key to his legacy. Without it, he would be nothing but a footnote, lost to time. But with it, he could build an empire that stretched across continents, that lasted for centuries. As he stood before his council of advisors, his father's generals, men twice his age, seasoned by battle, watched him with growing unease. Their voices trembled with doubt as they questioned his plans. One said, "Sultan, you are young. The city is impenetrable. No one has succeeded in 1,000 years. It is a dream, a child's dream." Another whispered, "This will be your undoing. The city has not fallen to the greatest rulers. How can it fall to a boy?" But Mehmed's eyes blazed. He did not flinch. His voice, when he spoke, was steady, almost eerie in its calmness. "You call a dream. I call a future where this city is mine, mine to rule." His words were a challenge to their doubts, a promise of something bigger than any of them could fathom. They were silent, but the doubt was still there, written on their faces. They saw a boy who had only recently come into power, sitting in the shadow of his father's greatness. They saw a dreamer, a young man still testing his limits, with nothing but ambition and a strange fire in his eyes. But Mehmed saw something different. His fingers tapped on the map of Constantinople in front of him, tracing the intricate lines of the city's walls. He had already studied its defenses, the massive chain across the Golden Horn, the mighty walls that had withstood centuries of attacks, the sea and land defenses that made it seem like the perfect fortress. Mehmed didn't see barriers. He saw opportunities. He saw weaknesses, places where the city's defenses could be outwitted. The city may have seemed immovable, but he knew something his court did not. He knew that it was not invincible. He would prove it. They said it was impossible, Mehmed murmured, more to himself than anyone else in the room. His gaze hardened, as if he were already standing before the walls of Constantinople. "Watch me." Episode 2. The city that broke armies. The city of cities, as they called it, had never been taken. Constantinople was a living legend, a colossus of stone and steel, sitting proudly on the edge of 2 continents. Its triple-layered walls rose like mountains, each layer stronger than the last, reinforced by centuries of experience and expertise. The city had defied every conqueror who dared to dream of taking it. It had withstood the sieges of the Romans, the Crusaders, and even the most formidable caliphates that stretched across the lands from Baghdad to Cairo. 1,000 years of defiance, 1,000 years of triumph. The Byzantine Empire had been on the brink of collapse for centuries, but Constantinople, with its ancient walls, had always held fast. It was impenetrable, protected by natural defenses, the sea on one side, the towering walls on the other. Inside, the Hagia Sophia stood as the soul of the city, a symbol of its indomitable spirit. The city's pride was unshaken, as were its people. Every great army that came to its gates had failed. Even the Crusaders, with their bloodlust and towering numbers, had come and gone without a whisper of success. The Arab caliphates, mighty in their own right, had fallen back in defeat. No matter the strength of the forces, the defenses of Constantinople had always held. The city had become a symbol of endurance, an example of how the greatest walls could withstand the might of the most powerful empires. "No one can break Constantinople," the city's people would say with pride. They believed it, for they had seen it happen time and again. But this time, there was a new challenger. The young Sultan Mehmed II had his sights set on the impossible. While others feared the city's reputation, Mehmed was determined to make it his own. In the quiet of his war room, He studied the city's defenses, noting every possible weakness. The walls seemed impervious, built by emperors long past, reinforced over centuries of warfare. Yet Mehmed was not daunted. His generals, however, were not as confident. Many of them had served in other campaigns and had seen the incredible strength of Constantinople's defenses. "It cannot be done," they whispered to each other. Some even advised the Sultan to abandon the plan, to focus on other, less impossible targets. But Mehmed refused to hear it. He saw something they did not see. He saw a new era, one where fire could tear through the mightiest walls. But before he could strike, he had to first confront the reality of the city's defenses. The great iron chain across the Golden Horn would prevent. Episode 3. The weapon that shook the earth. The siege of Constantinople was no longer a matter of numbers or strategy. The walls, massive, ancient, and seemingly invincible, could no longer be taken by the usual means. Mehmed too knew this, and he knew that if he was going to succeed, he had to think beyond the methods of his predecessors. He needed something that would shatter the centuries-old legacy of those walls. And so, he turned to the unthinkable. For months, whispers had spread through the Ottoman camp of a new weapon. It was said to be colossal, a weapon so powerful that it could shake the earth itself. The very idea was met with skepticism at first. Some called it a fantasy, an impractical tool that would never work against the unyielding walls of Constantinople. But Mehmed's vision was far ahead of theirs. He didn't just want to siege the city. He wanted to redefine what was possible in warfare. And then, on a cold morning, it was revealed: the mega cannon, forged by a rogue engineer named Orban, a Hungarian craftsman with a vision that matched Mehmed's. This beast of a weapon was unlike anything the world had ever seen. 12 feet long, capable of firing stones as large as a man, it was the largest cannon ever built. Orban's creation was a miracle of engineering, a tool of destruction so immense that it seemed unnatural. When it was rolled into place, the very ground seemed to tremble under its weight. Mehmed watched as the first test shot was fired. The sound was like thunder, a deafening crash that echoed across the Bosphorus. The earth trembled as the massive cannonball soared through the air, striking the walls of Constantinople with a force that reverberated across the city. The ground seemed to shake with the sheer force of the shot, and for the first time, the Byzantines understood what Mehmed had been planning. This was no ordinary siege. This was fire, and it was coming for them. The cannon fired again and again, each blast shaking the walls, sending cracks through the ancient stones. The Byzantine defenders could do nothing but watch in disbelief as their legendary defenses were slowly, methodically broken down. The old ways of warfare were crumbling before them, as the sound of each cannon shot reverberated like a warning. Change was coming. Mehmed's generals watched in awe. For all the planning and the strategy, this was the great equalizer. The city's towering defenses, once thought impenetrable, were finally beginning to give way. The walls, designed to withstand centuries of attacks, had never faced anything like this. The age of stone was ending. The age of fire had arrived. Every shot from the cannon felt like a new chapter in the epic of the Ottoman Empire. Mehmed stood tall, watching as each blast sent his enemies reeling. With each strike, his dream of conquest became more tangible. His eyes were fixed on the city's walls, but even now, he saw beyond them. He saw the future, the empire that would stretch across continents. And he saw the fate of a civilization hanging by a thread. The Ottomans were no longer just besieging Constantinople. They were breaking it down piece by piece. And every crack in the stone brought Mehmed one step closer to his destiny. The walls may have been ancient, but now they were just another obstacle to be overcome. And Mehmed knew that no matter how high they built their defenses, the fire would always find a way to burn through. Episode 4. The chain that stopped an empire as the Ottoman forces closed in on Constantinople. They faced one last formidable defense, a massive iron chain that stretched across the Golden Horn, blocking the entrance to the harbor and preventing Mehmed's navy from entering the city. The chain was a masterpiece of engineering, designed by the Byzantines to protect the harbor from invasion. It was thick, made of iron so strong that no force could break it. For centuries, it had kept the city safe from naval attacks, and now It was the last line of defense between the Byzantines and their mortal enemy. Mehmed had spent months preparing for this moment. His ships, carefully assembled and armed for battle, were waiting just outside the chain. But as they approached the Golden Horn, the sight of the barrier stunned the Ottoman commanders. The sea route was closed, and the navy was trapped. The Byzantines could hardly contain their triumph. The chain had done its job. The Ottoman fleet was pinned down, unable to pass into the harbor, and the defenders felt a wave of hope wash over them. They believed this would be the turning point. Mehmed had been stopped, but what they didn't know was that the young sultan had been expecting this. As the Ottoman forces gathered on land, panic began to spread. The navy had been their key to victory. Without it, their hopes of completing the siege seemed impossible. Mehmed's advisors begged him to retreat and rethink his plan. They had no way to breach the chain, and without naval support, the siege seemed to be at a standstill. But Mehmed's mind was already at work. He refused to back down. In his eyes, every problem was just another puzzle to solve. Defeat was not an option. The young sultan saw the chain not as an obstacle, but as a challenge, one he would find a way to overcome. As his advisors debated strategies, Mehmed quietly left the camp and gathered his closest generals. His mind raced with ideas, each more daring than the last. He had already defied every expectation by building the massive cannon. Now, he would do the impossible once again. With a confident smile, he turned to his generals and declared, "If the sea won't let us pass, we'll bring the sea to the land." This was the moment when Mehmed's genius would shine through. He ordered his fleet to be dragged across land, over the hills that separated them from the Golden Horn. Mehmed's audacity stunned his enemies. The Byzantines had never seen anything like it. In a bold, unprecedented move, the Ottomans used wooden rollers and ropes to drag their ships, 70 ships in total, across a hill, bypassing the chain that had seemed impenetrable. The fleet was now positioned on the other side of the barrier, ready to strike. The sound of the chains clanking and the groaning of the wooden rollers echoed through the camp, as the Ottomans carried out the impossible under the cover of darkness. In a single night, they had turned the tide of the siege. The Byzantines were caught off guard, unable to respond in time as the ships were moved across the land and into the Golden Horn. When the first Ottoman ships appeared in the harbor, the Byzantines were stunned into silence. The chain was no longer an obstacle. The city was surrounded both by land and sea. The impenetrable city, it seemed, was not so invincible after all. The Byzantine defenders could hardly believe their eyes. They had thought their final line of defense was unbreakable, but it had been outsmarted. The hope they placed in the chain had shattered like glass. The once proud walls of Constantinople seemed to crumble from within, and Mehmed's forces were now ready for the final push. As Mehmed stood on the hills, watching his fleet approach the harbor, he knew one thing for sure. Nothing would stop him now. Episode 5. Ships on a Mountain. It was the night that broke the Byzantine spirit. For days, Mehmed had been calculating, planning, and plotting. The chain across the Golden Horn had been thought to be an immovable obstacle, an unbreakable defense that would stall the Ottoman advance. But Mehmed's audacity was limitless. He refused to let that chain define the course of the siege. The Ottoman forces, tired from days of brutal bombardment, now faced a new challenge. They had to move their fleet, 70 ships strong, over the mountain. The ships were trapped in the Bosphorus, blocked from entering the Golden Horn by the Byzantine chain. But Mehmed had no intention of allowing this to end in failure. His mind raced with solutions, and in the stillness of the night, a daring plan was set into motion. By dawn, the city would be surrounded in a way no one could have imagined. The unthinkable was about to happen. The Ottomans began their work under the cover of darkness. Hundreds of men, pulling ropes, pushing on rollers, and laboring together, moved the ships across the hills of the Bosphorus. The immense warships, some as large as a building, were carried over land on wooden rollers, slowly creeping across the hills as the city slept unaware. The sight was like something out of nightmare. Ships marching across the land like a conquering army. The Byzantine defenders had no idea what was happening on the other side of the hills. They were watching the water, thinking the Ottomans were still blocked by the chain. The night passed in quiet uncertainty, the last of the Byzantines' resolve beginning to fade with each passing hour. By morning, the ships had reached the Golden Horn, and when the Byzantines woke up, they could scarcely believe their eyes. The once impregnable city of Constantinople was now surrounded by both land and sea. Mehmed's fleet had bypassed the Byzantine defenses, rendering their last hope useless. The ships had sailed into the harbor undetected, bypassing the chain with a maneuver that defied logic. The once proud Byzantine navy was rendered irrelevant, its defenses now completely compromised. The city that had held out against Crusaders, Arabs, and every other invader for over 1,000 years was now in grave danger. The sound of Ottoman warships in the harbor sent a ripple of fear through the Byzantine defenders. They had never imagined this. How could this happen? Mehmed's ships lined up, strategically placed, ready to unleash devastation on the weakened defenders. The Ottomans had already begun pounding the walls, but now, with the fleet in place, they were about to launch a final assault. The Byzantines knew the end was near. Their once strong fortress was no longer enough to stop the relentless tide of the Ottomans. The mighty walls of Constantinople, which had held firm against so many great empires, still stood, but their spirit was broken. The defenders who once held out with pride now saw the Ottoman forces from both sides. Hope was draining from them. It was as if the city itself had surrendered in spirit, even before the final blow had been dealt. Constantinople's famous walls, the symbol of its indestructibility, remained untouched, yet in the hearts of the people, the cracks were already visible. The city had fallen mentally, even though its walls stood firm. Mehmed knew that the time was drawing near. He was not just breaking the walls, he was breaking the spirit of Constantinople. And when the heart of a city gives out, the walls no longer matter. Episode 6. The day the legend was born. For 53 days, Mehmed's forces laid siege to Constantinople. Day after day, the city withstood the bombardment, its massive walls holding strong against the Ottomans' fearsome cannons and relentless attacks. The Byzantine defenders, though weary and outnumbered, clung to hope, their indomitable spirit keeping them on the edge of resistance. But Mehmed knew victory was within his grasp. The siege had been long and brutal, but the walls of Constantinople, once believed to be invincible, were beginning to show signs of weakness. The super cannon that had already caused so much destruction continued to pound the walls, and cracks began to appear, slowly but surely. Then came the final moment. One fateful morning, after a night of violent cannon fire, the city's walls finally gave way. The unthinkable happened. The walls of Constantinople collapsed. The Byzantine defenders, exhausted and demoralized, could do nothing to stop the flood of Ottoman soldiers pouring through the breach. It was as if the city had been waiting for that one final moment, when the impossible would become inevitable. The Byzantine Empire, which had stood tall for over 1,000 years, was now nothing more than a dying breath. The streets erupted in chaos as Ottoman forces stormed through the city. Fire and blood filled the air. The defenders fought valiantly, but it was too late. Constantinople was no longer their city. It belonged to Mehmed now. Mehmed, the 21-year-old sultan, led the final charge, marching through the broken gates of the city. As his soldiers flooded the streets, he made his way to the Hagia Sophia, the grandest church in the city, and a symbol of Byzantine power. There, in the heart of the fallen empire, Mehmed would claim his victory. Inside the Hagia Sophia, Mehmed stood before the great altar. The massive dome loomed overhead, a testament to the grandeur of the city that once was. But now it was his to command. The Byzantine Empire had fallen, and the Ottoman Empire had risen. As Mehmed stood at the altar, he declared himself the conqueror, the ruler of a new world, and the one who had brought the once mighty city to its knees. The city's spirit had been broken. Its defenders, who had fought so hard to hold on, now faced the bitter reality of their defeat. Constantinople was no longer the city of cities. It was the cradle of a new empire, an empire led by a young sultan who had defied every expectation. Mehmed the Conqueror had done what no one thought possible. He had taken a city that had broken armies for centuries and made it his own. As Mehmed stood amidst the ruins, he whispered to himself, "I came as a boy. I leave as a legend."